company invented the exact technology that would destroy it, looked at the prototype, and locked it in a drawer. You have been told they didn't see it coming. They built it. Another company was offered the chance to buy a tiny, money-losing startup for $50 million. They laughed the founders out of the room. That startup is now worth more than $200 billion. The company that laughed no longer exists. One phone maker owned 40% of the entire global market. 4 years later, its handset business sold for scrap, and its CEO stood on a stage and said, "We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost." And then there is the energy company that Fortune named the most innovative in America 6 years running. The innovation, it turned out, was in the accounting. When it collapsed, it took 20,000 jobs, a 100-year-old accounting firm, and billions in retirement savings down with it. The scariest thing about every company on this list is that none of them were stupid. They had the talent, the money, and in some cases, the actual invention. They fell anyway. Here is how. Let's count it down. Quick note first. This channel runs on people who prefer the researched version to the recycled one. If that is you, subscribe. It genuinely keeps me reading annual reports and bankruptcy filings so you don't have to. Number 5. Kodak. For most of the 20th century, Kodak moment was in the dictionary of ordinary speech. At its peak, the company controlled the American film market almost entirely and employed well over 100,000 people. Now, the myth. You have heard that Kodak got blindsided by digital photography. That is the opposite of what happened. In 1975, a 24-year-old Kodak engineer named Steven Sasson built the first self-contained digital camera. It weighed about 8 pounds, shot a 0.01 megapixel black and white image, and wrote it to a cassette tape over 23 seconds. It was clunky. It was also the future, invented inside Kodak years before anyone else. Sasson later summarized management's reaction. It was filmless photography, so the response was, essentially, "That's cute, but don't tell anyone about it." Now, to be fair to Kodak, Snopes has pushed back on the tidy version of this story. The 1975 prototype genuinely was not market-ready, no real consumer market existed yet, and Kodak did keep developing digital tech and made real money licensing the patents. But the core problem is real, and it is worse than not seeing it. Kodak saw it perfectly. Kodak's own leadership could not bring themselves to cannibalize the film business that was printing money every quarter. Protecting film felt rational every single quarter and was suicidal across the decade. Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in January 2012, with roughly $5.1 billion in assets against $6.75 billion in debt. The company that invented the digital camera was killed by the digital camera. It just took 37 years. At number 4. In the year 2000, a struggling little DVD by mail startup with fewer than 300,000 subscribers flew to Dallas to make a pitch. The founders offered to sell their entire company to Blockbuster for $50 million and to run Blockbuster's online arm. Blockbuster at the time had around 9,000 stores, tens of thousands of employees, and roughly $6 billion in annual revenue. CEO John Antioco and his team, by multiple accounts, essentially laughed them out of the room. Why pay $50 million for a company that couldn't turn a profit? The startup was Netflix. Now, here is the part the memes leave out, because the real story is more tragic than "dumb executive says no." Antioco eventually got it. He understood the digital threat, launched Blockbuster Online, killed the hated late fees, and rolled out Total Access, which was genuinely working. Blockbuster Online had grown to around 3 million subscribers. Then, a boardroom fight over Antioco's pay package, backed by investor Carl Icahn, pushed him out in 2007. His replacement, former 7-Eleven chief James Keyes, reversed the digital strategy, cut the online budget, brought back the late fees, and doubled down on physical stores. That was the actual fatal move. not the 2000 meeting. The 2007 decision to retreat back into real estate right as streaming arrived. Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy in 2010 with nearly $1 billion in debt. The same year, Netflix passed 20 million subscribers. Small twist to warm the heart of anyone who has ever been overruled. After Antioco was forced out, he sold his Blockbuster shares and put the money into Netflix, placing at number 3. At the end of 2007, Nokia was the undisputed king of mobile phones. Its Symbian operating system held over 60% of the smartphone market. Even after the fall began, in 2008, Nokia alone still had roughly 40% of all mobile phone market share. 40%. One company. That same year, 2007, Apple shipped the iPhone. Nokia's engineers were not fools. They had touchscreens and smartphone concepts in their labs. What Nokia lacked was the will to abandon what was working. Symbian was a mess to develop for. Apple built a clean ecosystem that attracted developers. Then Android arrived and did the same thing across every price point, top to bottom. In 2011, Nokia's new CEO, Stephen Elop, wrote an internal memo that leaked almost instantly. He compared Nokia to a man standing on a burning oil platform in the North Sea who has to choose between the fire and a plunge into freezing water. He wrote, "Our platform is burning." Nokia's answer was to jump onto Windows Phone, tying itself to Microsoft. It did not work. Windows Phone never gained traction, and there was, by Elop's own admission, no plan B. Microsoft bought Nokia's phone business in 2013 for around $7.2 billion, and later wrote almost the entire value off. Elop's line at the end has become the epitaph for the whole era. "We didn't do anything wrong, but somehow we lost." He was almost right. The thing they did wrong was believing that being right yesterday would protect them tomorrow. Halfway. If you are getting something out of this, subscribing takes 2 seconds and tells the algorithm that business history with actual sources deserves an audience. And drop your next topic in the comments. Companies that made an incredible comeback? The worst product launches ever? Industries that vanished completely? I read every suggestion, and the most requested ones get made. Top 2. Everything so far has been a company that missed a wave. The top 2 are different. These did not get disrupted. They lied. Enron. Formed in 1985, it grew from a boring gas pipeline company into an energy trading colossus. By 2001, it was the 7th largest publicly traded company in the United States. Fortune magazine named it the most innovative company in America 6 years in a row. Here is how the magic actually worked. First trick. Mark-to-market accounting. The SEC let Enron book the entire estimated future profit of a long-term deal as income the moment the deal was signed. Sign a 20-year contract, imagine what it might earn, and record all of that as profit today. If the real earnings never showed up, that was a problem for a future quarter. Second trick. Special purpose entities. Enron created a web of shell partnerships, some run by its own chief financial officer, and used them as dumpsters for its debt and failing assets. At the time of collapse, Enron had moved at least $27 billion, nearly half its assets, off its own books. The illusion was a company of soaring profits and no visible debt. The reality was the reverse. It unraveled in late 2001. Analysts started asking questions the numbers could not answer. Enron admitted a $638 million quarterly loss and a $1.2 billion cut to shareholder equity. The stock went from around $90 to under $1. Enron filed for bankruptcy in December 2001 with $63.4 billion in assets, the largest U.S. bankruptcy in history at that moment. Enron didn't fail to innovate. It innovated at fraud and got caught. At the top place, Enron killed itself and hurt its own people. The company at number 1 killed itself and nearly took the global economy with it. Lehman Brothers was 158 years old. It survived the American Civil War, both World Wars, and the Great Depression. It began as a cotton trading operation in Alabama in the 1850s and became one of the most powerful investment banks on Wall Street. Then, it fell in love with the American housing market. Through the 2000s, Lehman loaded up on mortgage-backed securities and related assets, borrowing enormous sums to do it. At its peak, its leverage ratio was reported around 30-1, meaning for every real dollar it held, it had borrowed roughly 30 more. That is a fantastic strategy as long as house prices only ever go up. House prices stopped going up in 2007. The subprime mortgages underneath all those securities began to default. The assets on Lehman's books curdled, and because it had borrowed $30 for everyone, even a small drop in value was catastrophic. Over the weekend of September 13th and 14th, 2008, the US government and other banks tried to arrange a rescue. Nobody would take on the toxic balance sheet, and the government chose not to bail it out. On September 15th, 2008, Lehman Brothers filed for bankruptcy with around $639 billion in assets, the largest bankruptcy filing in US history. A record it still holds. Roughly 25,000 employees walked out carrying boxes, but Lehman is number one for what happened next. Its collapse froze global credit overnight. Banks stopped trusting each other. Stock markets crashed worldwide. What had been a US mortgage problem became the global financial crisis, and governments spent trillions and years digging out. Thank you for watching to the end. Genuinely. I will see you in the next video.